It's one of our favorite passages in the church. And yet, it comes in a very tumultuous time in Israel's history. When Isaiah writes this, he's in the midst of warning Jerusalem that they've committed rebellion, idolatry, and injustice. And because of this, Isaiah is promising that Jerusalem is going to be burned away, that Assyria is going to come like a purifying fire. But a new Jerusalem will take its place. And a kingdom of justice and peace for all nations will rise from the ashes. Isaiah's chapters 7 and 9 are actually directed not at Israel as a whole, but are actually directed at the current king, Ahaz. And Ahaz is a descendant of King David. Not that that has done any good for those that have followed King David. They've all been mostly terrible kings. And so Isaiah is actually promising in those chapters that Ahaz's destruction is coming. But that also a new king will be raised up. And this new king that Isaiah promises is going to be a branch from the stump of David's family. And he will be called Emmanuel, which means God with us. Where else do we hear that? This new king will be empowered by God's Spirit, is bringing freedom from oppression, and is raising this new Jerusalem. And it is this promised new king to whom Isaiah ascribes the titles Mighty God, Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace. Our focus this week is on the title Wonderful Counselor. Maria's youngest brother, Paul, just recently passed his defense of his dissertation. This is the last hurdle he's had to face in completing his doctoral degree. And it's a big deal. I think he finally passed. I think it's his third time, somewhere around his third time he had to schedule the defense. Pastor Karen, I'm sure, can attest to how difficult sometimes that can be, because you got to find the readers that will be reading and to whom will ask the questions, to whom you're defending your dissertation. And sometimes that you need to switch out readers last minute. Sometimes readers are like, you need to work on that. And so you've got to postpone your defense. And so I think this is like the third or fourth time he's had it scheduled, and finally was able to do his defense and passed. Yeah, it's huge. It's a huge accomplishment. It's okay, he's not watching the live stream. You don't have to applaud for him. And we wanted to celebrate that. We had plans to go out to Fuller to be there at his graduation, and it's just one of the many things on the long list that COVID has kind of stolen. But we were able to have like a little family Zoom meeting with him and to celebrate, and kind of surprised him as much as you can surprise somebody on the Zoom. But Maria pretended we had news. And so what could everybody get on a Zoom call, which I have no idea what they thought we were going to announce. I'm very grateful we didn't have any such news. I'm telling you about this because Paul's degree, the doctorate he's getting, is one in psychology. He's now a licensed psychologist. I actually texted him and asked him this week, what are you going to go by? Are you going to say you're a psychologist, a therapist, a counselor? And he said, I'll probably use psychologist. I said, cool, I'll use it. So he's going to be a psychologist. Or as I joked and told him, I said, what are you going to be? Psychologist? You're just going to write big nerd who helps you deal with your issues? And he said, I actually like that. So that's what I'm going to call him, the big nerd who helps people work through their problems. And he's super good at it too. I mean, if you saw him, he looks, if it wasn't for the little gray in his hair, he'd look 12. But he is super good at it. And I can't tell you how many times at family get-togethers, all of us have sat down, like, especially like the siblings. Maria has, I don't know if you know, Maria has 4 younger brothers. Or not 4, 3. There's 4 of them, 3 younger brothers. And all but Paul are married. And so when all of us get together, there's like 7 of us, just the siblings and the in-laws. And the late night conversations that we've had have been just, like, I look forward to it. It's like, all right, let's get through the day until about 9, 10 o'clock, and then we'll get to have the real conversation, like the serious conversations, you know? And having Paul going through his doctorate and getting all of this brings all of that to bear in our conversations, and they've been so good and so life-giving and so, like, transformative. So for him to finally finish this, I'm super proud of him. And Maria is too, but I'm proud of him. Someone else that I thought of as I was writing this is Michelle, who's a trained and certified spiritual director. And spiritual direction is really just another form of counseling. Fair? See? Like I said. Spiritual direction is another form of counseling that has an obvious bend towards spiritual conversations. It's helping people notice what God may be doing in their life and then how to attune to it. Yeah? That good? See? I pay attention. Michelle is also very good at it. I have personally benefited from her spiritual direction. And I know I'm not the only one at this church that has. Just in case anybody was looking for a recommendation on a spiritual director, there you go. I bring all of that up because when we hear, and his name will be Wonderful Counselor, that's likely something like what Michelle or my brother-in-law do, is what comes to mind. That's what we think of. Someone gifted at helping people work through problems, where a person may or may not be lying on a couch telling a therapist about their stuff. But is this the image Isaiah had in mind? Well, okay, obviously not the modern therapy part. Like, Israel didn't have a school of modern psychology education anywhere, let alone couches or psychoanalysis. But what about the basic underpinnings? Having somebody who hears your problems and guides, directs you through your solutions. And is this something, if we're talking about a new king, is this something a king would do anyway? Doesn't that kind of seem a little below their pay grade? Like, I don't expect the president to come hear my problems, right? So shouldn't he have more pressing matters? And so those are all the questions that I had bouncing around my head as I'm thinking, okay, what does it mean for this new king to be a wonderful counselor? And so as I did some digging, here's what I found. That word counselor in Isaiah comes from the Hebrew word ya'atz. And ya'atz, it means to advise, consult, give counsel. So counsel. It's used some 80 times in the Old Testament. And over half of those over half the times that ya'atz is used in the Old Testament, it's translated as either counsel or counselor. If you add in the number of times that it's now that it's referred to as either counsel, counselor, or advise, or advice, you're up to like 75%. So of the 80 times it's used in the Old Testament, up to 75% of the time it's either counsel, counselor, advise, advice, consult. And so it seems, to my surprise, because I kind of expected this to mean something else. Because often, the more I feel like my modern understanding helps me translate Scripture, the more I feel like it's not going to mean that. You know what I mean? To my surprise, counselor does indeed, Isaiah's use of the word counselor does indeed have a lot of parallels with how we understand what a counselor is. It does seem like we can draw some understanding from how we think of counselors and counseling today. And then I was surprised by that, and then realized, I really shouldn't be surprised. Because we just spent 3 weeks talking about attunement, right? And attunement is primarily a psychological term. Like, certainly there is some use of the word attuning in music, right, Scott? But attunement, that version of the word, primarily is a psychological term. It was psychology that basically coined that term. They've specifically cultivated it in counseling and in counselors, and it's what counselors do. But it's also something that we have learned that God does too, right? God attunes to us, invites us to attune to Him, and empowers us to attune to each other. And so in this way, of course, the promised king, so in this way, if God also attunes, and if God is kind of a counselor himself, then it makes sense that this king would also be a counselor. But this actually goes beyond human counseling. Because Isaiah doesn't just say that the king will be a counselor. He will be a wonderful counselor. Oh yeah, a wonderful counselor. Now, wonderful in our kind of verbiage, we kind of toss it out there as kind of a fluff amplifier. Like, oh, that's wonderful. But the word in Hebrew, again, I gotta go to the Hebrew because it's the Old Testament, and the Hebrew word for wonderful is Pele. And Pele isn't just some fluffy superlative that we get to attach to things. Pele means it's a wonder, it's a marvel, it's almost miraculous. Like, basically to say something is wonderful is to say it's almost basically a miracle. And so what Isaiah is saying is that this king will be a counselor, but not just any counselor. The king will be a marvelous, miraculous, dare I say, supernatural counselor. Now, there are times where I've been talking to Paul and he will say things to me and I'm like, that's supernatural that you know that. Now, it's not. It's just he's really well trained. But imagine if someone was actually supernaturally like a supernatural counselor, and how much better they'd know like us and be able to speak into us and point out things of which we are not aware about ourselves, and to draw that out and make us aware and be like, oh, how'd you do that? And yet Isaiah is promising that this new king will be wonderfully adept at counseling Israel, not just of individuals, but of ruling the nation, the entire kingdom. His counsel will bring peace and justice. His counsel will be wise and insightful. His advice will be good and beneficial to an otherworldly degree. It will not be only God who is a wonderful counselor, but this king will be too, not merely reliant on God's counsel, but capable of it himself. And not to bury the lead, But Jesus is the fulfillment of this promise. Jesus is the king about whom Isaiah is talking about. I bring that up now just so that I say it, even though I'm fairly certain everybody in this room already knows that. But he is the promised king. Jesus is the wonderful counselor. Jesus is the raiser of the New Jerusalem. Part of my role as pastor involves some degree of counseling. Now, not every pastor is gifted in the same way as every other. And so I will be honest and confess that counseling is not my strong suit. None of you looked shocked or surprised. Did I mention Michelle is really good? But maybe the most important counseling within my role as pastor is to attune to the congregation. It may not be the premarital counseling, it may not be the one-on-one counseling, but I think maybe the most important as a pastor is the ability to tune to the congregation. Much like a king or leader attunes to his or her nation and discerning how to respond to what's going on among the people. Often this means being able to tell people what I hear God saying to everyone and helping everyone discern how to hear that for themselves. What does God sound like to you? I don't actually ever hear God audibly. I imagine most of us don't. There may be some of you that do, and I'm totally fine with that. I'm a little jealous. It'd be nice if it was just a voice in the back of my head that I could physically hear. Although maybe if I did, maybe I wouldn't tell anybody that. But it'd be nice to have that external experience, to have like an external thing that impacts me. Unfortunately for me, it sounds an awful lot like my own voice in my head. And so it takes a lot of discernment to figure out, is that God talking or is that me talking? And that's one of the places where I find counseling to be so valuable. To have somebody else be able to discern with me what I'm hearing or think I'm hearing, and be able to give voice to say, that doesn't sound like you, so it must be God. Or that just sounds like you. And I am grateful that God counsels and that Jesus is able to be in my life and be that wonderful counselor, because Lord knows I need it. To be fully transparent with you and to, encourage, congregational accountability, I'm starting counseling on Friday. I have my first session because I realize I need it. I need to better attune to what God is telling me. I need to learn to better attune to all of you. I need to better attune just to myself sometimes. And I'm grateful that I say that in part for accountability, just so you know and are aware, but also because I think it's important that we destigmatize seeing a counselor. We need to normalize that. And in the church, that hasn't always been the case. We've been a little behind the curve on that one. That you don't need a counselor, you just need to read Scripture. Well, by that logic, you don't need a pastor either. You don't need a counselor, you don't need a pastor, you don't need a teacher. I mean, we want to follow that logic too, if you really want to follow that to the absurd, you don't need a mechanic, just read Scripture. The Lord will lead you how to fix your car. Like that logic doesn't hold up. God gives gifts to people to be able to do what we need. And just as we need pastors and teachers and leaders, I think we need counselors. And it's not that having a counselor means I'm not listening to God anymore, that I'm not reading scripture, or that I'm not discerning what God is doing. In fact, it's just the opposite. Therapy helps us attune better. Because there are things in our life that just need that external someone to come alongside us to affirm that what we're experiencing is indeed happening, to affirm that what we're going through is not easy, and just to bounce ideas off us, or to be a sounding board for us, and to guide and direct us through solutions. So I have a pastor friend of mine, and during his counseling work at his church, responding to not any one particular counseling session, but just over the aggregate, he composed a letter. And it comes out of that counseling work from what he's experienced in counseling others, and it's written as though God wrote it. It's not the first time anybody's ever taken that approach, but that's what he did. And so he wrote this letter as if it comes from God, and it doesn't quote scripture specifically, but is heavily influenced, obviously, by things that it says about God or things that God says in scripture. I like to think it doesn't quote scripture, but it captures its heart. And I'd like to read it to you. And I want you to bring all yourself to it. All of yourself that has lived through this past year. Just this hot mess that is 2020. And all your anxiety, all your frustration, disappointment, grief. And just bring all that to the surface and offer it to God, and let this letter be his response to you. You got it? Okay. Beloved child, do you know how much I adore you? When I look into your eyes, into your weary and beat up soul, do you know the joy that I feel? I see your struggle. I see the hurts and pains. I see the fear in your heart that maybe somehow I've turned my face from you. Up until now, you have been resistant to my love. You've had your reasons. I know your struggles, but it's time for you to experience a love that you have only dreamed of from a distance. This is what your soul has been longing for. It's what it has always longed for. This is the love that you have been searching for all your life and in all the wrong places. I love you as you are right now, with all of the scars and mistakes. I look at you and I know the real you, not just the mask you've put up to protect yourself. I love you far more than you even love yourself. You look in the mirror and you see distortions and fractures. You see the labels others have put on you and the doubts you've believed about yourself. You're worried you've messed it all up. Stop looking into dirty and broken mirrors. I invite you to see yourself as a reflection in my eyes. Then you will see yourself as I see you. I created you on purpose. I created you for so much more. I know your deepest fears, doubts, and dysfunctions, and yet I still see my child. My arms are open. There is nothing you can do to earn my love. It cannot be earned. It has already been paid for by my Son on your behalf. Because of him, it is perfectly yours forever. But I get it. Love has betrayed you too often. It has cost you so much. It has left so many scars. It is scary to be vulnerable to such a love. You no doubt imagine that my love is just more of the same, and that I will eventually tire of you or be ashamed of what I see. You're afraid to look into my eyes and find that I am angry with you. But that will not happen. I only desire to honor you with a boundless love and glory. I want to restore you. You haven't known this love because you haven't asked me for it. And instead you've pursued lesser loves, counterfeit gods. Hear this, know this. My love will not leave you as you are. My love heals. Do not look within or pursue more empty lovers. Come to me. Your soul is weary, but I offer living water. Come and drink freely. Don't be ashamed. Come. It is time to leave the darkness and shadows that plague you and enter the light. I'm ready to show you a love that changes everything. God. Folks, this is the good news. This is our wonderful counselor who sees us, all that we are or fail to be, and knows our deepest needs and offers us peace and compassion. I said earlier that Advent is actually the beginning of the church year. Maybe this can be a new beginning for us. A chance to experience anew the God who sees, hears, and cares. Thank you for being part of our online family. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell so you get notifications for any future videos or content. And feel free to please share with a friend. You can also follow us on Facebook or Instagram. And if you feel so inclined and would like to donate and support our ministry, please click the donate button found in the description. Thank you, and God bless you.